This video is going to cover the brainstorming process and the thesis writing process for the Continuity and Change Over Time essay on the AP U.S. exam. When we are asked to identify continuity and change over time, we are being asked to identify a series of events over a distinct time period in history. Normally these events are centered on a specific theme with defined start and end dates within a period of American history. The purpose of these continuity and change over time graphic organizers is to investigate a series of events, place them in chronological order, then determine whether there was either more continuity or change during that historical period. When we are asked about continuity and change over time, there is almost always a significant change within the period under investigation. As with all of the graphic organizers in this book, there are no right or wrong answers. They will hopefully provide you with opportunities to articulate arguments for class discussions. I will say that, in my opinion, this is the hardest style of essay to write for the AP U.S. exam, and you may need to refer back to this video multiple times during the school year as you prepare for your AP U.S. exam in May. In your writing packet, there is a section that shows you the basics of how to do the timeline graphic organizer associated with continuity and change over time. Step 1, you will label start and stop dates on the timeline. So this one has 1918 to 1953. Once you have your timeline labeled, step 2, you identify significant events on the timeline. So of course these are going to be specific proper nouns. You would want the more the better, okay, because you're having to determine, is there more change or are things remaining the same during this time period? Okay, and typically I try to write things that I consider to be change on the top of the timeline and things that I consider to be the same or continuities on the bottom of the timeline to kind of help me gauge if there is more change or continuity. Step 3, once you look at it, you have to decide whether there was more continuity or more change, okay? And so once you do, you select 3 of your most significant events, keeping your 2-to-1 ratio. Remember, your X statement's going to be the 1 and your A and B statements will be the 2, okay? If you are arguing that there are more continuities, then you need 2 examples for continuity and 1 for change, and vice versa. So let's go and look at the graphic organizer that we have our example. So we got to flip, rotate clockwise, there we are. So this example is wanting us to look at continuity and change over time from the rise of sectionalism in America from 1820 to 1861. So this is the time period right before the Civil War where everyone begins arguing over slavery. For some reason they have all of these other dates, but really we're starting here at 1820 and we're going to 1861 when we have the outbreak of the Civil War. And so they come along and they've named many different things, okay? Ones that are of note stand out to me immediately is the Missouri Compromise of 1820, okay? The Missouri Compromise of 1820, okay, said that Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state. I believe this is when Maine came into the Union as a free state, so it kept the balance of free and slave states. And on the southern border of Missouri, the one that is the northern border of Arkansas, okay, everything south of that line, that's a 36/30th parallel, everything below that line extending all the way out to California would be open to slavery, okay, via popular sovereignty, okay, people could vote whether they wanted slavery or there, and everything north of that line of the 36/30 parallel would be forbidden for slavery, okay. And so we have different things: corrupt bargain in 1824, 1828, tariff of abominations, okay, South Carolina is going to threaten to leave the Union. Of course they do in 1861 finally, but they threatened to do it 30 years prior, okay, because northern tariffs were hurting southern agriculture. You have the election of President Jackson, okay? The publication of the Liberator in 1831, speaking out against slavery. The Mexican-American War, where the southwest portion of the United States came into our possession. Okay, the failed Wilmot Proviso, where they tried to ban slavery in the Mexican cession lands, which under the Missouri Compromise should be open to slavery. Of course, the Wilmot Proviso failed. And then we have another significant event in 1850, okay, the Great Compromise, the Great Compromise of 1850. I don't know how great it was, but this said that California would enter as a free state. This would make an uneven amount of free states. There'd be more free states than slave states, so the South was going to have to get something really good in return for this compromise. And what they really wanted was a fugitive slave law, a tougher fugitive slave law, because the Underground Railroad was up and running and slaves were kind of trickling out of plantations into the North, and Southern plantation owners did not like that. Now, we can talk about the merits of that later because the Fugitive Slave Law backfired on the South, but still in 1850 we are able to compromise, and so we are not yet on the brink of war. After all these things, okay, all these different things, okay, we are still able to compromise, okay? And that is very important, okay? Our last event that I find significant, Bleeding Kansas, is a result of this, but the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, okay? Now, it is going to basically strike out the Missouri Compromise. It says that the Kansas territories and the Nebraska territories will be open to slavery via popular sovereignty, meaning that the people in the territory can vote on whether or not they want slavery or not. Okay. In return for these areas being opened up for slavery, the Transcontinental Railroad that had been tossed around in Congress, instead of having a southern route connecting through southern states to the desert southwest, our newly won lands from the Mexican-American War, that Transcontinental Railroad is going to go through northern states. And the unfortunate effects of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was Bleeding Kansas, where you had people from Missouri and other northern states flood into the territories, and blood will be spilled over slavery. Okay, and so once you identify your three major points, you come down and you list them right here. List three key dates. So you have your Missouri Compromise, Great Compromise of 1850, and then our Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, and of these three, which one's the most important? Well, all the change happened after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, because from 1820 to 1850, people were still willing to compromise. People were on board with the idea of popular sovereignty, where the people in the territories would vote, was still in place. The Civil War was not inevitable yet. People did not believe that the country would really go to war over this issue. But after 1854, it's apparent that no one's willing to compromise. People are now spilling blood over the issue of slavery. Okay, the Kansas-Nebraska Act struck down the previous Missouri Compromise. Violence, okay, is breaking out over the issue of slavery, and this is going to be eventually too much, and now the Civil War is inevitable. And so you're going to say, Mr. McCrary, it seems like there's a lot of change going on during this time period. Yes, but for these 30 years, no matter what happened, they were still able to compromise. And suddenly, in the last 10, okay, suddenly compromise was no longer available. And so my argument is, remember, there's not really a right or wrong answer. You just have to back this up in your writing, is that our X statement okay, is going to be that there is less change during this time period, even though it's significant change. Okay, and so our Missouri Compromise and our Great Compromise will be our A and B statements. Okay, and so now we are ready to go look at our prompt. What are we going to write our thesis on? Okay, so let's look at our prompt. It says, evaluate the extent of change or continuity during the rise of sectionalism in America from 1820 to 1861. So again, our action verb here is we are evaluating, okay? We are evaluating. And so we still don't know what evaluate means, then we go to our writing packet, and evaluate means to make a judgment by weighing up the strengths and limitations. So we are making judgments here about, is there more is there more continuity, things stay the same, or is there more change? And we decided that even though there's a lot of change going on, they were still able to compromise for the majority of this time period. So my X statement will look like this. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 created a point of change that was irreversible and marked a point in which the Civil War was inevitable, meaning it was going to happen. Okay. My A-B statement. However, let's unbold that. However, during the first half of the 1800s, legislation such as the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Great Compromise of 1850 showed that the majority of the first half century in the 1800s had continuity in its attempts to compromise over slavery. And so now we have our X, our A, and our B, and so we come back and we just clarify what we're saying with our Y statement. Therefore, there was more continuity from 1820 to 1861 than change. Okay, so we have our thesis statement here. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 created a point of change that was irreversible and marked a point in which the Civil War was inevitable. However, during the first half century of the 1800s, legislation such as the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Great Compromise of 1850 showed that a majority of the first half century in the 1800s had continuity in its attempts to compromise over slavery. Therefore, there was more continuity from 1820 to 1861 than change. Now, this is very much the most difficult one to master. Okay, it seems that there's a bunch of change. You just have to take a stand on what you think and be able to back it up with your writing. Okay, if you have examples to back up your writing, then you will be good. The last thing I'll say before I run out of time is that this particular essay, we did not use the thematic learning objectives to come up with categories. Thank you, and please refer back to this video during the year if you have any questions.